On October 9, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a historic ruling that sent shockwaves through Washington and the global economy. In a closely watched case, the court struck down the Trump administration's sweeping tariffs, which had been a cornerstone of its trade policy for years. This decision delivered a major blow to the scope of executive power in shaping U.S. trade policy, setting a new precedent for how such authority is exercised. The 6-3 decision invalidates tariffs that had collected over $165 billion from American businesses and consumers, sending a clear message that only Congress, not the president acting alone, has the constitutional authority to regulate foreign commerce. The ruling is expected to have far-reaching implications for future administrations. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, clarified that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, was never intended to grant presidents such broad and unchecked tariff authority. The court emphasized that the law's original purpose was to address genuine national emergencies, not to serve as a blanket justification for imposing tariffs. The ruling marks a pivotal turning point, restoring the constitutional separation of powers and sharply curbing the president's ability to bypass Congress on critical economic matters. Legal scholars say this decision reaffirms the checks and balances at the heart of American democracy. Businesses now have a strong legal basis to seek massive refunds for tariffs paid, setting up what could become a complex and costly process for the Treasury Department. The financial and administrative impact is expected to unfold over months, if not years. While the decision cannot erase years of economic disruption and uncertainty, it decisively returns the power to regulate trade to Congress, where the Constitution originally intended it to reside. Lawmakers are now tasked with reasserting their role in shaping America's trade relationships. The debate over tariffs and trade policy is far from over, but the authority to wage it has now shifted firmly back to the legislative branch, setting the stage for new discussions and potential reforms in the years ahead. The Supreme Court's decision centered on the IEEPA, a law meant for targeted responses to foreign threats, not sweeping tariff policy. The Trump administration's use of the IEEPA to justify broad tariffs was seen as an overreach, bypassing Congress's constitutional authority over trade. The court ruled that emergency powers cannot be used to rewrite economic laws or impose tariffs at will. This decision reasserts limits on executive authority and reminds Congress that its delegations of power have boundaries. The case stands as a pivotal check on presidential power, reinforcing that major trade changes require legislative action. Trump's tariffs were central to his America First agenda, aiming to reduce trade deficits and reshore jobs by taxing imports. The administration bypassed traditional processes, using the IEEPA to impose duties on a vast range of goods from nearly every major trading partner. At their peak, these tariffs covered hundreds of billions in imports, fundamentally altering costs for American businesses. The strategy was both economic and political, appealing to voters frustrated by globalization. However, it triggered retaliation from other countries, escalating trade wars and harming key U.S. industries. The resulting uncertainty and disruption led to the legal battle that ended with the Supreme Court dismantling this central policy. The aggressive approach to tariffs ultimately created new challenges for American businesses and global trade. The Trump-era tariffs generated a staggering $165 billion in customs duties for the U.S. government, marking a dramatic shift in trade policy and revenue collection. This massive cost was largely shouldered by U.S. businesses and consumers, who felt the impact through noticeably higher prices on everyday goods and essential materials. The sudden spike in tariffs sent shockwaves through global supply chains, causing delays, shortages, and increased costs for manufacturers and retailers alike. Companies were forced to make tough decisions, either absorb the extra costs, pass them on to customers by raising prices, or completely rethink their sourcing strategies. These moves were especially challenging for small businesses, which often lacked the resources to adapt quickly or negotiate better deals. As uncertainty grew, investment slowed, with many companies putting expansion plans on hold and delaying new projects. Retaliatory tariffs from other countries struck back at American exporters, hitting sectors like agriculture particularly hard and leaving many farmers struggling to find new markets. Now, the Supreme Court's decision opens the door for potentially massive refunds, offering hope to businesses that paid billions in extra duties. This could inject much-needed capital back into the private sector, helping companies recover and reinvest in growth. However, unwinding years of supply chain changes and business adjustments won't be quick or easy, as companies have already adapted to a new reality. The economic landscape has shifted significantly, with some industries transformed and others still struggling to regain their footing. The process of refunding billions in tariffs will also be a massive logistical challenge for the Treasury, requiring careful coordination and oversight. While the ruling ends one era of disruption, it also marks the beginning of another, as businesses and markets adjust to the new legal and economic environment. Both businesses and policymakers now face the complex task of navigating the aftermath, making decisions that will shape the future of American trade. The long-term effects of these tariffs and their reversal will continue to influence U.S. trade, industry, and the global economy for years to come. The Supreme Court's decision marks a pivotal moment in American governance, setting the United States on a new path by firmly rejecting a major expansion of presidential power over trade. This ruling is not just a legal technicality. It's a significant shift in how the nation approaches economic policy and the balance of power between branches of government. By striking down the controversial tariffs, the court not only invalidates a key Trump-era policy, but also mandates the Treasury to return a staggering $165 billion to businesses across the country. This unprecedented refund is expected to have far-reaching effects, injecting much-needed capital back into the private sector and potentially reshaping business strategies nationwide. While this massive refund could spur new investment, job creation, and economic growth, the administrative burden on both government agencies and businesses will be immense. Processing claims, verifying eligibility, and ensuring compliance will require significant resources and coordination. The ruling also fundamentally alters the process for future trade actions, forcing them back through Congress or requiring targeted legislation. This effectively ends the era of sweeping unilateral executive tariffs and restores a more deliberate, democratic approach to trade policy. For businesses, this means a more stable and predictable policy environment, allowing for better long-term planning. At the same time, Congress regains its constitutional authority over trade, rebalancing the separation of powers. On the international stage, the decision reassures America's trading partners that sudden, sweeping tariffs are now off the table. This paves the way for more collaborative negotiations and strengthens global economic relationships. The debate over protectionism versus free trade will undoubtedly continue, with passionate arguments on both sides. However, the legal boundaries for such policies are now much clearer, providing a framework for future discussions. Ultimately, the power to set the terms of America's trade is now firmly back in the hands of the legislative branch, as intended by the Constitution. This marks a fundamental reset for American economic statecraft, signaling a renewed commitment to checks and balances and a more transparent, accountable approach to trade policy. The court's ruling will most immediately impact businesses that paid billions in tariffs, many now poised to receive substantial refunds. For struggling firms, this could be a lifeline. For larger companies, it's capital for reinvestment and growth. However, many have already restructured supply chains, making a return to old practices complex and uncertain. Consumers may not see immediate price drops, as companies have already adjusted pricing to reflect past tariffs. The most significant benefit may be the prevention of future price hikes. Small businesses, often hardest hit by tariffs, now have a chance to compete on fairer terms. The decision underscores how macroeconomic policy directly affects the viability of businesses and household finances. The real impact will unfold as companies and consumers adapt to a post-tariff landscape. The legal fight began in the Court of International Trade, where importers challenged the Trump administration's use of the IEEPA. After initial setbacks, a federal circuit panel ruled the tariffs unconstitutional, setting up a direct clash over executive power. The Supreme Court fast-tracked the case, recognizing its national importance and the billions at stake. The central issue, whether the president could use emergency powers to impose tariffs without clear congressional approval. Persistent legal challenges and lower court rulings paved the way for the Supreme Court's final decision. The case reaffirmed Congress's foundational role in regulating foreign trade. Despite the court's rejection of broad IEEPA tariffs, the executive branch still has targeted tools for trade policy. Section 301 of the Trade Act allows responses to unfair practices, while Section 232 permits tariffs for national security, though both are narrower and require more process. Major, long-term tariff strategies now require direct congressional action, ensuring broader debate and legal durability. The ruling channels trade policymaking back to traditional democratic processes with more checks and balances. Rapid, sweeping changes are less likely, but the result is a more stable and predictable environment for business. The shift may frustrate those seeking quick action, but it strengthens the role of Congress and public input. The Supreme Court's decision restores deliberation and consensus to American trade policy. The Supreme Court's decision is a defining moment for the balance of power in U.S. governance. By curbing emergency economic powers, the court reaffirms that Congress, not the president, controls trade and taxation. This will shape how future presidents approach both domestic and international economic policy. Large-scale unilateral trade wars are now far less likely, with a renewed emphasis on diplomacy and multilateral agreements. Businesses gain a more predictable environment, though the debate over tariffs will continue in Congress. The process of refunding $165 billion will have lasting economic and fiscal effects. The ruling is a powerful lesson on the risks of executive overreach and the importance of constitutional checks. As Congress reclaims its authority, the challenge is to craft a coherent trade strategy for a complex global economy.